Hello,
Hi there, Debbie.
how are you?
Okay, how are you?
Good.
I'm just going to pause the recording just because we don't need to record.
The stink eye from Charlie, like, we have to go. But I'm glad we lingered in Philly a little yesterday, because otherwise we would have actually been driving through when the branches were being
Yeah,
swept
yeah, yeah,
across the
yeah.
highway. Yeah.
Not good. Not
Well, there was a real storm predicted for last night in Philadelphia,
good.
but we never had any rain. We never had
Oh,
anything. It did get cloudy for a while, but by the time the sun set, it was partially cloudy but there was supposed to be a big storm here, but there wasn't.
hmm. Hmm. Well, I'm glad that you missed it this time. I'm just going to put in my. Okay. Would somebody please say something so I can tell if I can hear you all?
Can you hear us?
Hi, can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Wonderful.
Yay! It's so marvelous when technology works well for. Okay, so welcome everyone. Good to be with you all. Um, let's settle in, take our seat at the tish here, and allow all of our other thoughts to recede. Or as I once was taught, I think this is attributed to Emmanuel Levinas, that when you're studying Talmud, in his case, he was saying, when you're studying Talmud, whatever thoughts you're having, even if they might be complete distractions, are part of your study of Talmud. So either embrace all your distractions and make them part of the mosaic of your learning, or take a deep cleansing breath and let them recede into the background. And let's join together in a bracha. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Yes, love the idea of being busy with Torah and not gajillion other things that we have to be busy with as well. This week's Parashat Pinchas, and I think you all are familiar with the namesake of this week's parasha, who was introduced to us last week at the end of Parashat Balak. Pinchas is the name of the person who is probably the most dramatic zealot in all of this marvelous sacred mythology that we have before us. And we read his story in our time with a lot of discomfort. That's hopefully putting it mildly. But in fact, in the account of the Torah, he's rewarded for his behavior by God. So that's the story of Pinchas. I'd like to put him aside for another year, perhaps, and look with you today at a different part of the parasha. And this is also the parasha that has the famous story of the daughters of Tzolofchad, which is notable for us in our time, perhaps especially because it's such a rare delight to celebrate a moment in Torah when women are given some agency and some power to determine their own lives, in this case in the form of access to rightful inheritance. So I actually wrote to Shlomo, because Shlomo had shared with us, I think just a couple of weeks ago, about an insight about the word Tzolofchad. And I wrote to you, Shlomo, this morning just to say, would you jump in here and bring that up for us again? I have something very different that I want to study with you today, but this is by way of entry.
Okay, well, a couple of weeks ago when we read Parashat Shlach Lecha, it says the children of Israel were in the desert and they found a man, Mikoshesh Eitzim, who was gathering wood on Shabbat. And they brought him, and so we know his sin, which is gathering wood on Shabbat, but we don't know who the man is. His name is not mentioned, and he was put to death. In today's parasha, Pinchas, in chapter 27, when the daughters of Tzalafchad come to Moshe and say, we want land, they say, Avinu meit bamidbar, our father died in the desert. V'hu lo haya b'toch ha'edah. He was not part of Korach's group. He didn't die because he was swallowed by the earth. He b'chet'o meit. He died because of his sin. The sin is not mentioned here, but we know that this is Benot Tzalafchad, so we get his name. The interesting thing, I mean, these writers are so, they get you. So somebody, the sin, but you don't know who did it. Now you find out that here's a guy who committed a sin, and you know his name, but the sin is not specified. But the name Tzalafchad itself is very interesting. And although I would like to think that this is my own observation, as I was thinking about this since Rachel's email this morning, I thought, this is a great observation, but I don't think I came up with it. And I was reminded when I visited Ne'ot Kedumim in Israel, the biblical garden, that they had some comments about Tzalafchad. And salaf is the Hebrew word for a caper. And chad is a Hebrew word meaning sharp. When George and I, 25 years ago, took a tour to Mount Sinai, and we were hanging around in Sinai Desert, we noticed low growing all over the place were capers. And the chad part is every leaf of the caper has two thorns at the bottom. So you have sharp caper, and caper is terrific kindling wood. It's a very woody, low-growing plant, and it gets dried out easily. It's good kindling. And so together with Noga Haru-Uveni from the Od Kedumim, come up with sharp capers, and this guy was gathering probably caper wood in Sinai. And so now we know who it is that was we have a good idea who the Mikoshesh Eitzim was, and we know who the father of the daughters is, what his sin was. So that was just, these writers of Torah, like Rachel pointed out last time, the connection between Nachash, snake, and Nechoshet, copper, there's those fiery copper serpents. These writers are pretty good. Anyhow, that's Noga Haru-Uveni from the Od Kedumim. That's his take, and my repeating his take on this Tzalafchad and Benot Tzalafchad and Mikoshesh Eitzim.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, I remember the pieces of that, but I really wanted to allow us to hear it again. And boy, there's even like a little bit of potential redemption for the Mikoshesh Eitzim from that we always read that and think, really, you're going to kill a guy for gathering wood on Shabbat? And here his daughters, I don't know, somehow in their again righteous claim to their inheritance, somehow maybe you could read that as a tikkun for their father as well, something like that. Okay, so with the story of the daughters also kind of lingering in our consciousness, I want to start there, but only as an entree to what comes next. So let me share the sheet that I have for us for today. And this week's study is called Cosmic Pink Slip. And I hopefully will be able to reveal what that means as we go through our study. Okay, so first, let's see. This is first from the story of the rock. So this is what we're looking at now is what happened before that's connected to what's happening now. Okay, so there's the famous, I made up this phrase this morning on my walk with Jonathan, Parashat Hashavua, the episode of the rock, where Moses and Aaron are again on the receiving end of a lot of kvetching, of more than kvetching, really just big crying out from the children of Israel. Because Miriam has died, they're terrified, I think, that they will not have access to water, which is, no small thing when you live in the desert. And in a kind of moment of, I don't know, lost poise, let's say, Moses, in listening to all of this and receiving instructions from God, goes a little bit too far. So you're familiar with this story. I just put it here to kind of remind us. Starting at verse 8. You and your brother Aaron take the rod, bring the community together, and before their eyes order the rock to yield its water. God doesn't say strike the rock, but just speak to it. And Moses takes the rod. Look now look ahead, verse 10 into 11. Moses and Aaron feeling like, boy, anyone who's been a parent or who's spent time with little children who just will not let it go know how this feels. You just feel your temper's about to blow. And indeed, his does. He raises his hand and strikes the rock with his rod and, in fact, produces the needed water, but pays a dear price for his, again, sort of what I'm calling lack of poise. And just look at verse 12. I'm going to skip over to the Hebrew, but you can see it bolded there in the English also. Vayomer Adonai el Moshe ve'el Aharon, Ya'an lo he'emantem bi, because you did not have faith in me. Emunah is the word here. Look at this. Or if I give you just the root, you can see. Like it's where we get the same word amen when we say in shul. He'emantem, because you did not have faith in me, affirm. Lahakdisheni, to sanctify me, le'enei b'nei Yisrael, in the eyes of all Israel. So there's a big deal that they did this sort of in public in front of everyone. Lachen, lo taviu et hakahel hazeh el haaretz asher natati lahem. Because of that, just momentary lack of sort of self-control, you are going to pay by losing the golden prize here. You're not going to be able to bring the people into the promised land that God is saying I've been talking about this whole time. Okay, so this is already a few weeks ago, and I put it here because I wanted us to see the origin of the decree that's going to be further intensified this week. Steve, you have your hand up. Do you want to say something about this?
Just a quick clarification. I'm trying to understand what the implication is that specifically Moses and Aaron did that causes God to say, you didn't trust me. Is it an inference that striking the rock is doing that? Or was obviously the people in general with all the griping, I understand that, but what is the writer saying that God is calling out Aaron and Moses for doing?
So the simple answer is they were commanded to speak to the rock, and they hit the rock. And it's interesting here, I hadn't paid attention to this till you started asking your question, but we did this whole thing, I guess it was 2 weeks ago, about Aaron and his rod, his almond blossoming rod, and it's an instrument of many different things. Just quickly here, Kevin and Shlomo, and then, because this is meant to be just intro for us. Go ahead.
Understood. I think the important word here is in verse 11, where it says pamayim, twice. We have from the prior example that Moses was told to hit the rock and water came out. So he was thinking perhaps that's what he would do again. He wasn't obeying God's commandment. And the fact that he had to do it a second time makes me think it wasn't 2 hits in a row. It was 1 hit, and then God was saying, wait a minute, I'm giving you a chance here. Remember my commandment, and he goes ahead and hits it a second time.
So it really goes way overboard. Great, thank you. Shlomo, go ahead.
We have a profound disagreement here. We already have heard when the 10 spies came back And God said, okay, nobody from this generation except Kalev and Yehoshua are going into the promised land. Moshe and Aharon were not included in going into the promised land already when the spies came back. And so God is saying here, you are not going to go in because you haven't sanctified my name to the people. There's nothing in the Torah that ever says you're not going into the land because you hit that rock. And so how did he not sanctify God's name? When the 10 spies came back, Moshe and Aaron fell on their faces and they did not say a thing.
Right.
And it was Yahushua and Kalev who said, have faith in God. He's going to bring us into the land. We're going to conquer. It's going to be great. And here again, he didn't have faith of the people. This is the second time when they're complaining. What do? They go to Ohel Moed. They fall on their face. And that's how they didn't sanctify God's name, not by hitting that rock. As you yourself pointed out, once that mateh is mentioned, whether it's at the burning bush, whether it's in front of Pharaoh's magicians, whether it's to bring every one of those plagues, whether it's to split the Red Sea, nobody mentions that mateh unless it's going to be used for something. And my feeling is the Dibartem El Hasela does not mean speak to the rock, but it means speak. It means speak in the direction or toward the rock. Because the people, when they first came out after the Red Sea, before they even got to Sinai, they came to Rephidim, which was renamed Mei Merivah, which is where they're back now.
Here at the bottom.
And it was very important at the beginning of that journey for the people to see that miracle, to instill their faith in God. And now for the next generation, it's important for all. Nahum is mentioned several times in this thing. You want people to see this.
Yes.
So this instruction about speak toward the rock is setting the stage. You're over here, Moshe. The rock is in front of you, and the people are behind the rock. So when you speak toward the people, you're speaking toward the rock, because the new generation at the beginning of its journey, which is going to be the conquering of the land, has to see the same miracle. And my feeling is...
Oh, okay. Drop the mic.
I have to say one thing. Yeah. Yesterday in Shul at BZBI, I gave the Dvar Torah that I just talked about.
Okay. So you didn't just pull that out of your head just to say.
Well, I did over the last couple of weeks in preparing that.
Right, but you had time to think about it. Okay. Touche, and point well taken that this is not necessarily the... I'm drawing some quick conclusions here based on some Pshat commentaries. Bruce, I see your hand, but I have a bunch of stuff that I really want to get to. So I'm going to ask you to hold on. Okay. And if we can, we'll come back. All right. So with all of that, I feel like we're like at the table with the Meforshim here. We've got all the big voices telling us what to read, how to read this, which is excellent. Now let's go ahead to our parasha. So this is now, we're looking at Parashat Pinchas now. And you can see here what I've started with. The selection here includes the little bit sort of at the end of the episode of Bnot Zelofchad. This is sort of the updated policy, if you will, that comes out of the daughters' approach, their appeal to Moses and his ultimate appeal to God. And God turns around and says, this is how it'll now work. And just notice here, it's really, I think quite radical for biblical times. Vel b'nei Yisrael tidaber lemor ish yamot ben ein lo. If a man dies and he has no son, v'ha'avartem et nachalato levito. You, in fact, will transfer the property to his daughter, if he has a daughter. Okay, and then it gives some more details about the specific rules about the transfer of property when someone has died, which again, it sounds so, policy and sort of litigious to us. But if the whole story is about coming into the land and how to live in the land and the relationship with the land, then who has ownership or how ownership gets parceled out is of central importance, and it's going to continue to be important. Okay, so now notice what happens. This first half of the selection I have in front of us here is all about that clarification of inheritance. And now look at verse 12. Verse 12. Vayomer Adonai el Moshe, God says to Moses, Ale el har ha'avarim hazeh. Go up to this mountain ha'avarim, or et ha'aretz asher natati livnei Yisrael, and see, you can see from the top of this mountain the land that I have given to the children of Israel. V'ra'ita ota v'ne'esafta el amecha. You're going to stand there. When you have seen it, it's going to be time for you to go. Ne'esafta el amecha. You are going to be gathered to your people, which is one of the very poetic biblical ways of saying it's going to be time for your life to come to an end. Kasher ne'esaf Aharon achicha. Just as Aaron, your brother, was gathered to his people. So that already happened. Aaron is no longer with us in this moment. Kasher meritem pi b'midbar tzin b'meribat ha'eda lehakdisheni. I'll say you don't need me to read this to you in Hebrew, but you can see the reference here is back to the story that we just were looking at before. In the wilderness of Zin, when the community was all riled up, you disobeyed me. You disobeyed my command to uphold my sanctity. You can see it here. And here we have again this business about not just did you disobey the command to sanctify my name, but it's about sanctifying God's name in front of, within the eye, before the eyes of all the people, so that they can see. Okay, so Shlomo, I have no quarrel with what you were laying out for us, but in this particular case, the Torah does indicate that spot as the place where this decree was clarified. Or
I made sure not to mention that in my Dvar Torah.
Oh, good. Okay. Very, very, very crafty of you. Okay, so let's go on. And look what happens here at verse 15. So just pause here for a minute. Moses, as Shlomo said, and as we've seen before, Moses already sort of knows that his path as a leader is not necessarily direct into the land. But here it's being said most clearly, and in fact, God is saying, go up onto that height, that mountaintop, and look so you can see the place that we're going to be taking everyone else, but not you. And just pause for a moment and imagine yourself as Moshe Rabbeinu, and you've been told you've been on this major mission, and you're even going to be able to see the end of it, but you're not going there. And, we just have to ask ourselves, what would our reaction be? We might argue with God a little bit, or we might plead, or we might pray, or something. The text is devoid of any of that, which is remarkable. So hold on, let's look back. Hang on, come back over here. Okay, so Moses responds, Vayidaber Moshe el Adonai lemor, verse 15 into 16. Yifkod Adonai Elohei haruchot lechol basar ish al ha'edah. So, okay, God, if you're insisting on this as the course of things here, may it be that you appoint someone over the community. Asher yetzeh lifnehem va'asher yavo lifnehem va'asher yotzim va'asher yeviem velo tieh adat Adonai katzon asher ein lahem ro'eh. So just look at what he's saying here, verse 16 into 17. May it be that God appoints someone over all the community who will go out before them, come in before them, in other words, always be in the leadership, and who shall take them out and bring them in, so that they would not be like a herd of sheep with no shepherd. Moses, the shepherd of all shepherds, is saying, I've done this job and I know what's required, and let me tell you, God, this is what to do. But again, remarkable that there's, at least in the Torah text, there's nothing about him protesting this decree.
That's right.
And so go on to verse 18 now. Vayomer Adonai el Moshe, kach lecha et Yehoshua bin Nun. God says, I've already got succession planning in place here. Take Joshua. As Shlomo mentioned, Joshua was one of the two who, in the episode of the spies, was designated as, having permission to go forward because of his faithful defense of God's plan, as opposed to a faithless defense, faithless prosecution. So just going on here, take Yehoshua bin Nun, ish asher ruach bo v'samachta et yadcha. So he has the spirit within him, and samachta et yadecha. God is saying to Moses, place your hands on him, like give him smicha, make it official. V'ha'amadata oto lifnei Elazar hakohen v'lifnei kol ha'edah. So just further instructions about how to sort of enact this peaceful transfer of power. V'ha'amadata oto lifnei Elazar hakohen v'lifnei kol ha'edah v'tzivita oto le'enehem. Make him, command him within the sight of everyone. So it's very clear that he is going to be the next leader. V'natata mehodcha alav Lama'an yishmeu kol adat b'nei Yisrael. Instill him with some of your authority, so that there's no question that he is the next one in charge, because we're not going to have another, Korach on our hands here. We're going to move this forward smoothly and successfully. Okay, so this is really the part that I'm interested in here, hence my attempt at a creative title for today about pink slips. So hang on, Shlomo, I see you've got something to add in here. I just want to, what I'd like to do in the time we have left is look at some rabbinic sources, commentaries on this, and then talk a little bit more broadly. Shlomo, do you have something specifically related to this? No? Okay. All right, let's go ahead. So I've been trying to train myself to go in order of the commentaries. In other words, older commentaries first and going forward. Let's see if I was successful. So we're starting with Midrash Tanchuma, which is, again, one of those older Midrashic commentaries. And Midrash Tanchuma asks one of the questions that I think we all ask, like, why this right after Benot Salafchad? So remember, up here at the beginning of our Torah selection, I just put this as kind of like a placeholder to remind us of the story of the daughters of Tzalafchad, which is the last thing that happens in this week's section, this part that we're looking at, before Moses gets this instruction to anoint Joshua, to accept his fate and to anoint Joshua. Okay, so the Midrash asks, Ela sheshama Moshe, Naton titen lahem, v'haya savur shenit ratza lo hakadosh baruch hu. And where am I? Amar hareini nichnas et Yisrael. So Moses is saying, well, maybe since God said to the daughters of Tzalafchad that they would inherit, that daughters could inherit, maybe there's like a divine policy change going on here. And maybe I am also going to be allowed to enter the land of Israel. Hareini nichnas et Yisrael. Amar lo HaKadosh Baruch Hu, God answers him, Gezerati b'mekoma omedet. My decree stands in its place. There is no change. So now, Ale el har ha'avarim hazeh. So in other words, the Midrash is saying there's a little bit of the humanity in Moses here that we miss by reading the Torah text only. But when we add the Midrash to it, we imagine Moses in his heart, in his consciousness, saying, maybe there's going to be a way for me here. Maybe the the episode of the daughters of Tzalafchad I could take as a sign of divine policy change. And the answer comes by quoting directly from the Torah, Ale el har ha'evarim hazeh. The Midrash is saying that verse from the Torah, go up on this mountain, is God's way of saying, you're still going forward as I planned. Ale el har ha'avarim hazeh v'ra'ita ota v'ne'esafta el amecha. You will look, v'ra'ita ota, you'll look and see the land, and then you'll be gathered to your people. God says, Ein ata yafeh me'achicha. You are no better than your brother. You are literally no more sort of yafeh, meaning, I don't know, it literally means beautiful or lovely, but in a moral sense. You're just where Aaron is. Shlomo, go ahead.
Yeah, it just struck me the name of the mountain, Avarim.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And Ma'avar, same word, same root, means a transition, a bridge.
Correct.
And so
Yep.
that's significant at this point that he's going up on this mountain of transition.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I was also wondering if it could be connected to Aveira, which is a transgression. I didn't find a commentary like that, but anyway, okay, so here's Rashi, and Rashi is, I put this here because he's quoting Midrash Tanchuma. So it's just interesting to see sort of the process of the commentary. You have Rashi now, some centuries later, reading Midrash Tanchuma just like we are and saying, okay, this is how I understand it. He's commenting now on the same little passage, Ale el har ha'avarim, as Shlomo saying, the mountain of transitioning, or maybe the mountain of transgressioning, transgressionary transitions, or transitory transgressions. I don't know. The Rashi says, Lama nismecha lechan. Why is this connected here? Why do we tell this thing about Moses going up on the mountain right after the daughters of Tzalafchad, the episode of the daughters of Tzalafchad? Kevan she'amar kadosh baruch hu naton titen lahem. Again, sort of echoing the midrash that we just read, because when the Holy One, blessed be He, said to Moses, you will definitely naton titen. It's that, again, that doubling over of the language. The verb is latet, to give. So here it's sort of doubly emphasized. You must give it to them. You shall surely, as it says in the English, give them their correct inheritance. Amar oti tziva hamakom lehanchil. Shema hutra hagzera ekanes la'aretz. Maybe I have a chance here, Moses is saying. Amar lo akadosh baruch hu. We read this already. Gzerati b'mekoma omedet. God says no. But then Rashi extends the commentary even a little more and says davar acher. Sort of, here's another way of thinking about it. Kevan shenichnas Moshe lenachalat b'nei Gad uv'nei Reuven samach ve'amar. Let's find this in the English so we can see. As Moses entered into the territory of the tribes of Gad and Reuven, which are on the eastern side of the Jordan River, samach, where am I now? Samach ve'amar. He says, okay, I'm already seem to be sort of entering. Samach ve'amar. He's rejoiced and he said, Ki medume shehutar li nidri. It seems to me that maybe this vow, nidri, like kol nidre, this vow has been annulled. And of course, we know the answer to that. But just again, the richness that the Midrash and on top of that Rashi is bringing to the straight text, in which we hear nothing of Moses's protest or struggle with this harsh decree, which at least it seems to me it's a very harsh decree. So let's just finish this part. Mashal lemelech shegazar al beno shelo yikanes lefetach palatin shelo. So he brings in this mashal, a story, a teaching by way of a story, which is, this is a story of that reminds us of the king who decreed that his son, Let's do it in English. A king who decreed that his son would not enter the door of the palace. The king was with his son as they entered the gate, and the son went in after him, and the father didn't seem to raise any objection. And then into the main, the official Oval Office, and there didn't seem to be any problem. But as soon as the king was about to enter his private room, his inner sanctum, the promised land, if you will, he said to him, Beni mikan ve'elach ata asur likanes. My son, from here and going forward, you may not enter. And here Rashi is quoting from Sifrei. I didn't remember to pull that up, but just to see where the sources are, okay? So really trying to understand what's going on here between Moses and God, and is Moses worried about this, struggling about this? The commentary says, oh yes, he is. Okay, I'd like to go on. I have just a little bit more. Okay, no peeking there at that last thing. Okay, now this is from Mechilta de Rabbi Ishmael. So actually now we're going back in time again, an earlier Midrashic commentary. And they're starting with, they're actually starting by quoting passages from Devarim, from Deuteronomy, when, the language is Rav Lecha, it's enough. You're not going any further. Okay, and let's just read through this. Rav Lecha. Okay, so here we have Moses pleading with God. Amar Moshe lefanav. Moses says before God, Ribono shel olam. You have to love the way the Midrash puts this. This is a very, this name, Ribono shel olam, is not biblical. You would never hear that language in the Tanakh. It's rabbinic, but they don't mind putting that in Moses' mouth for their purposes. Ribono shel olam, klum nigzera gzera shelo ekanes la. Moses says, I think maybe you meant, if you were going to prohibit me from entering, you meant that I shouldn't enter as a king. Fine, he says. Ekanes la kahadiut, I think is how you pronounce that. Fine. I will enter as a commoner. I don't need to be in charge. So you can see he's like bargaining with God, or sort of negotiating with God. Amarlo, God says to him, Ein melech nikanes kahadiut. There's no such thing as a king entering as a commoner. Adayin haya omed umebakesh kol habakashot hahem. But Moses still persists and keeps coming back with Amar Moshe lifnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He says to God, Ribono shel olam, ho'il v'nigzera gzera shelo ekanes la'aretz. Sorry, I get some. Lo kemelech, I won't enter as a king. Velo kehadiut, and not as a commoner. Ekanes la b'mechilat kesarion. I will go underneath, through the tunnels of what we now know as Caesarea. And again, like catch the free creativity here, because Caesarea, of course, is named after a Roman leader. And that Roman civilization didn't exist at the time of, so Moses couldn't have called it Caesarea, but again, the Midrashist doesn't mind having some creative latitude here. Ekanes la b'mechilat Kesarion. I'll go through the tunnels underneath the city of Caesarea, shehi mitachat lifnei lifnim. That way, I won't actually be entering the land. I'll be sort of going below it. And that way, I can still get in, right? Moses probably didn't talk that way, but Amar lo v'shama lo ta'avor. And now, if we went through all of this, I'll kind of move a little more quickly here. If we went through all of this, you would see the text here is going to continue to quote from Devarim, several different places in Devarim where the affirmation is given. You are not going there. You're not going to cross the Jordan. You're not going to enter. All the way until Moses says, how about if my bones can cross? So let's just go over to the English. Now, is it possible for a dead man to cross? It must have been told to Moses that his bones would not cross the Jordan. And you have to, you read that and you think of Jacob and Joseph all the way back in Genesis into Exodus, who were allowed to be carried forward, who made requests that their bones be carried forward with the people, and they were given permission for that. They were honored in their request. Moses, of all people, no. God just keeps saying, you will not be able to go. And now finally at the end of this commentary, they're going back to the end of the Torah text. So just for context, look back here with me. Here, okay. So look what happens at the end of the Torah text now in Parashat Pinchas, verse 19. The instruction is, select Joshua, place your hands on him, transfer your authority to him before everyone. And this all has to be done before Eleazar the priest and before the whole community. So the priesthood is being enlisted here as, kind of the John Roberts of the moment, the Chief Justice, to make sure that the transfer happens correctly and sort of, without any gaps. Okay, so let's go back to finish our here. Where am I? Moses bent over the feet of Eleazar and said to him, Eleazar, my brother's son, implore mercy for me as I did for Aaron, your father. So look at this. Now the Midrash is imagining Moses carrying out God's command to go before Eleazar, Aaron's son Eleazar, who's now the Kohen Gadol, but in fact is still working his case in the Midrashic version. He's going to the Kohen Gadol and saying, there must be a way for me here. Could you kind of, I tried, I wasn't successful. Could you kind of speak on my behalf? And he says to Eleazar, let me at least see it with my eyes. Let me at least see the promised land with my eyes. And it was in response to this. And here they're again quoting from the end of Deuteronomy when Moses is about to die. But the language echoes what we just had in our parasha. Ale Rosh HaPiskah here. So instead of Ale Har HaAvarim. The same language. Go up on the mountain and see with your own eyes, but you won't go in. There's so many different ways that the Torah pokes at us in our lives through the presentation of these magnificent characters. And this is one where I think we're being asked to confront once again, all of us, what we have to face in our own lives, which are the moments where we come to question, we come to have to reckon with our limitations, the limitations of our longevity, the limitations on our capacity to live into our dreams. I've shared, I think once from the BMI, I've had a recurring sort of image, I think as I've gotten older, that this is how I am in my life. I'm standing there painting a painting. I'm painting it with, I'm sort of lost in the painting, and I have all kinds of ideas about other parts of the painting that I'm still going to work on. And I'm sort of happily going along, and all of a sudden a big hand comes down, takes the paintbrush out of my hand and says, thank you, that'll be all. And my reaction is, I wasn't done. I wasn't even done with this little part. And the march of time has no patience for that, or the march of God, if you will. So I have that imagery in mind as I read through these commentaries, and sort of for all of us, accepting the limitations that we have in our lives, even as we continue to march forward and try to fulfill the dreams that we have for ourselves and for those we serve. Debbie, and then Shlomo, and then I have some things to look at with you as we close up.
Sure. So, nothing profound, but like you, I think, on the same road, I can't help but think of stages of grief and bargaining as a good intended part of that.
Mm-hmm.
If I do this, will the life be preserved? Will my life be preserved?
Mm-hmm.
So I think one thing I think it just speaks to sort of the inherent distilled wisdom of these texts, that we can maybe take issue with some specifics or specific quotes or actions, but philosophically we're still dealing with the same human problems, questions about limitation, and how do we deal with trauma, how do we deal with grief, how do we deal with loss, and how do we deal with the fact that we're not going to necessarily achieve what we thought we were going to achieve
In this,
and
yes.
the terms with it. And what's so interesting about this is in the Midrash shares, you're sort of reducing Moses instead of I don't need to be king. He's actually acting like a toddler. Well, if I do this, we'll be okay now. If I do this, we'll be okay. So it's sort of like, to me, it was all about sort of turning maturity on its head. And it became a lens for us to look at what does it mean to not be mature and about acceptance. And then maybe that brings you to a point of acceptance. When you've gone so low, you can then sort of come back and get another perspective.
Wow. Thank you for bringing in that angle of grief, which is really what Joshua accounts has been taken away from him. It's a different kind of grief than losing a loved one, for sure. But yeah, same kind of bargaining is going on. Bruce, you were waiting from earlier, so let me go to you. Don't forget to unmute.
Thank you. Aaron was punished and was killed. Aaron did not strike the rock. His brother did. Is he guilty because he accompanied his brother and he died first? What I'm trying to understand, what's the response? Why did God choose to kill Aaron for Moses striking the rock? Did he intend that Aaron was supposed to restrain Moses? Or, I don't understand, and people keep repeating that, I'm going to punish you just like I punished Aaron. And so forth. And I'm trying to understand.
It's interesting. I think it's a great question. So why does Aaron and Miriam are punished for speaking out against Zipporah? Remember that? That's also in an earlier passage that from a few weeks ago. Miriam is punished with what we would call leprosy or something, and she's sent outside the camp, and then she's ultimately allowed back in. But if I'm remembering correctly, I believe that there's a connection between that transgression of hateful speech and the way that they're finally, brought to their death, perhaps prematurely. So I don't know how to answer your very good question about why Aaron, what is Aaron's part in this thing about striking the rock? I mean, Aaron, of course, holds some of the responsibility for the golden calf, which is a whole different subject, right. I think. But it's a really good question. I don't know if anyone else has a thought about that, or we can hold on to the question. So thank you. Shlomo and then Steve.
Yeah, well, I think I provided an answer to Bruce's question when I said they weren't punished for hitting the rock, but they were punished for not confronting or supporting the people when the spies gave their report. But the thing I wanted to say here is I see this totally differently. I don't see this as God punishing Moses and Aaron at all. I see this as El Rahum V'Chanun, as a matter of fact, as the compassionate God. Only 2 years into the journey, with all the complaining of the people, Moses says to God, I can't carry this people. It's too much for me. If this is what it's going to be, kill me. Moshe says, kill me, so I don't have to witness the wretchedness that's coming before me. And now Moshe in Devarim, and I'm really unhappy with the Midrash, because the Midrash puts a whole bunch of stuff in there that doesn't exist in Parashat Va'etchanan, I think it is, I'm not sure. But when Moses is talking about Canaan, God says, Ravlach, which can be translated as, you've had enough.
Yes.
You've had enough, meaning after these 40 years, after you couldn't sanctify my name before the people with the spies or when the water, you can't lead the people anymore. It's time to let go. This is all about recognizing in life when it's time to let go. And God recognizes that Moses and Aaron both, after 40 years, they are depleted. They have no strength left, as witnessed by they couldn't stand up to the 10 spies, and they couldn't deal with the people rebelliousness at the water. And then in the sentences which you just reviewed right before the two sentences you reviewed, Moses talks about going in and coming out. And in Devarim, which the Midrash didn't say, Moshe says, Hayom ani ben me'ah ve'esrim shana, I'm 120, lo uchal od latzeit v'lavo. I can no longer go out and come in. Correct. This is God the Rahman. This is God Rahman saying. And the only other thing I'm going to add is, how many of us in this lesson here in our class today, if we couldn't fulfill the goals of our life, how many of us would be immensely gratified by being able to go up and see that those who are coming after us are going to fulfill our goals, that it's not empty? And I think that's what God is doing here, is letting Moshe see, you've devoted your life to this. There it is right there. These new guys are going to get in there and they're going to do it. And who said that? Rabbi Tarfon. You don't have to finish the job.
Lo alecha hamlecha ligmor.
Yeah.
Right.
But you can't not get into it.
Yeah.
I think that's what's going on here.
I appreciate your reframe, and I will hold on to it. My question is, if that's the case, then why can't there be some language between God and Moses where God says, you have just done a superb job, and you have set the stage for a successful future, and we're going to give you a gold watch, and we're going to have a party for you, and off you go into the sunset with love. Where is all of that? Why is it only you hit the rock and you did this and you did that and therefore you're done? And I know God is not depicted that way in the Torah, but I'm allowed to wish.
Because the writers of the Torah wanted you to ask that question just now.
Okay, well then, mission accomplished. Good. Okay, Steve, and then either Marilyn or Mark, and then we're just going to show you one last thing.
And my comments really are a PS, excuse me, a PS to Shlomos, because I'm right on board with that. Part of it is, again, as the writers who wrote this down, how were they perceiving this history and what they wanted to communicate? This is a time going into this land where they need leadership who is perhaps blindly optimistic of their chances of success. And what was going to follow? This wasn't going into some uninhabited, deserted place where you're going to just set up your beautiful tents and live great. You're going to have battles ahead. You're going to have to conquer the locals. It's time for a strong leader like Joshua, who came back from the spies, the observations with blind optimism, so to speak, saying, yeah, we can get it done. And didn't fall on his face like Moses or Aaron. Their time is done. And this is the way to do that transition of power to those who are capable of the next quite difficult step, which is to take over the land and make it what perhaps God allowed Moses to see, maybe not only to see the land, but maybe in that vision, He was able to see the future,
The
see the
future.
beautiful tents of Jacob
Yes.
spread out over this peaceful land, which we're
Mhm.
still hoping will.
I was going to say, right, that's still a work in progress.
Yeah,
Yeah.
indeed. So
Great.
that's
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Beautiful. Thank you. Marilyn or Mark?
Yeah. So I was looking for whether there was a lesson for us human beings in this exchange, and that
Mhm.
is there, in other words, when something happens to someone or something happens in our own lives that we feel we didn't deserve, or why did it happen? There really isn't necessarily always an explanation, as we know.
Mhm. Mhm.
And it seems like this, to me, I just had a sort of a realization that this is the way we live, the same way that Moses and others lived, really not knowing why certain things happen to us or to other people, and it doesn't seem necessarily like that it has to do with anyone, with your behavior.
Mhm.
Elusive. That's the way I've sort of felt it.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. I want to just hold on to what Marilyn is saying about that elusive reality. And thank you to the people who have put such interesting things in the chat. In just the few minutes we have left, I just want to leave us with two things. So I'm going back to my source sheet. Okay. And here is what came up in my mind. And I think you've all seen this. Oh, I don't know why this. Let's put this all in one line where it belongs. So here's MLK invoking this very moment in the Torah. Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place, but I'm not concerned about that now. I just want to do God's will. And He's allowed me to go up to the mountain, and I've looked over, and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. So just a contemporary embodiment of this same surrender and this same agreement with God about what my role is here and where my role is going to have to end. I wanted to just end today's study with this poem by Marge Piercy, which is about work and about devoting yourself to the job in front of you, which I think is part of the lesson of Moses somehow. If we went back to the Torah text where there is no discussion of his bargaining with God or wondering, he just seems to accept, this is my job. So I'd like to just end here with this. The people I love the best jump into work head first, without dallying in the shallows, and swim off with sure strokes almost out of sight. They seem to become natives of that element, the black, sleek heads of seals bouncing like half-submerged balls. I love people who harness themselves, an ox to a heavy cart, who pull like water buffalo with massive patience, who strain in the mud and the muck to move things forward, who do what has to be done again and again. I want to be with people who submerge in the task, who go into the fields to harvest and work in a row and pass the bags along, who are not parlor generals and field deserters, but move in a common rhythm when the food must come in or the fire be put out. The work of the world is common as mud. Botched, it smears the hands, crumbles to dust. But the thing worth doing well done has a shape that satisfies, clean and evident. Greek amphoras for wine or oil, Hopi vases that held corn are put in museums, but you know they were made to be used. The pitcher cries for water to carry, and a person for work that is real. That is Moshe Rabbeinu, just putting his head down again and again to do the job, whatever the job is in front of him, not to argue with the overall plan. Thank you all so much for tuning in. It's really wonderful to learn with you. Next week, Rabbi Fred will be here to share some Torah with everyone. And then I look forward to being back with you the week after that. Everyone keep well, please keep well, and hope to see you soon.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everybody.